Good afternoon. Welcome to Assembly Revenue. Madam Secretary, will you please take the roll?
Assemblywoman Anderson.
Present.
Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson.
Present.
Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod. Assemblywoman Considine.
Present.
Assemblyman Hafen.
Here.
Assemblywoman Kasama.
Here.
Assemblyman Miller.
Here.
Assemblyman O'Neill.
Sorry. Here.
Assemblyman Hornlicker.
Here.
Assemblyman Roberts.
Here.
Assemblyman Yeager.
Here.
Chair Cohen.
And I am here. Please mark Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod absent excused as she is currently chairing another committee, and I'll try to let you know when she comes in. But for the time being, we have 11 members present, so we have a quorum. I'd like to welcome everyone who's watching or listening on the internet to this virtual meeting. Our meetings for the time being will be held in this format, and they're scheduled for 4 p.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Some housekeeping before we begin. Members and presenters, please silence your electronic devices. Courtesy and respect in our interactions during the meeting is required. Additionally, courtesy and respect when working with staff before and after meetings is required. Committee members will be using our laptops and possibly other screens and devices, not only to participate in this meeting virtually, but to view exhibits. So due to that, you may see members looking at multiple screens or hard copies of printouts. Please don't take this as a sign of inattention or disrespect, as we're still just trying to navigate our new reality of virtual committee meetings. As a reminder, and as stated in our agenda, we will have public comment, which will occur at the end of the meeting and may be limited in duration. Details on how to participate during public comment are available on Nellis, which you can go to on the legislature's website. If you wish to provide testimony or attend the meeting virtually, you must pre-register online, and registration opens when an agenda is posted to the Nevada Legislature's website. Upon successful registration, registrants will receive a telephone number, meeting ID, and instructions for joining the meetings. Also, as a reminder, pursuant to rule number 54 of the Assembly Standing Rules, if you testify in support, that means you support the bill or resolution as it is, or with the proposed amendments that have been approved by the sponsor of the measure. Opposition means that you're not supporting the measure as written, or with the amendment that has been approved by the sponsor of the measure. And as a side note, even if you love a bill, if you have changes you want to make to it, that's opposition. Feel free to tell us you love the bill and just want to see some changes. As for neutral, that's a position on a bill or resolution in which you're offering particular insight on the measure, but you express no position on the measure. So with that also, I just want to mention that we are going to have to get off of the hearing at 4:40. We will return if necessary, but unfortunately, this is, the people of the state of Nevada have said they want us to get this all done in 120 days, and sometimes this happens, but like I said, we will be back if we don't finish it. Additionally, after the hearing, after the hearing of the bill, Mr. Nakamoto, our staff, is just going to take a few minutes just to go through some marijuana tax law for us right now, and what we have as far as those taxes. You can also go to pages 56 through 58 of our revenue reference manual that contains that information. So with that, we're going to move on to our presentation of AB 322, which provides for the license regulation of certain events at which the sale and consumption of cannabis or cannabis products is allowed. Additionally, please note this will be, I believe the hearing will be conducted using the mock-up, which is available on Nellis. With us is Assemblyman C.H. Miller, and Assemblyman Miller, whenever you're ready, and I'll let you introduce your co-presenters as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, members of the committee. For the record, I am Assemblyman C.H. Miller, representing Assembly District 7 in Clark County. I appreciate this opportunity to present Assembly Bill 322, which provides for the licensure and regulation of certain events at which the sale and consumption of cannabis or cannabis products is allowed. Assembly Bill 322 was introduced to provide a solution that will curb illicit cannabis consumption at events by creating a designated space at certain events where limited amounts of cannabis can be sold and consumed in a legal and properly controlled way. This bill also aims to lower the barrier of entry into the industry, which will create opportunities for people of color who were largely shut out of acquiring licenses previously due to those high barriers and the limited number of available licenses. AB 322 will also help Nevada expand its revenue potential from this booming new industry in a responsible and regulated way. Presenting with me today is Ms. Aisha Goins, the innovative mind that developed the concept and founder of the Cannabis Equity and Inclusion Community. Joining her will be Ken Evans, president of the Urban Chamber of Commerce, and Andrew Mier, a renowned social consumption specialist and president of Top Shelf Bud Tending. Ms. Goins will take over in just a bit to discuss the bill and the amendments in greater detail. But first, I want to provide a little background information on those amendments. In 2019, comprehensive cannabis legislation was enacted with the passing of Assembly Bill 533. This bill created the Cannabis Advisory Commission and the Cannabis Compliance Board, which are modeled after the regulatory structure Nevada uses in gaming. And we all know Nevada is the gold standard in gaming. While I was not there at the time, or not here at the time, I should say, I can imagine that many of you who voted for this legislation did so with the goal of establishing Nevada as the gold standard in the cannabis industry as well. The 2019 legislation also charged the Cannabis Compliance Board with adopting regulations to provide for the gathering and maintenance of comprehensive demographic information, including without limitation information regarding race, ethnicity, age, and gender concerning owners and managers of cannabis establishments and holders of cannabis establishment registration cards. The report submitted to the Nevada Legislature in January 2021, is the first information we've had of the demographic makeup of Nevada's cannabis industry. Now, while I mentioned this report, I won't focus here as I believe Ms. Goins will provide some additional information regarding it when she speaks, and we have members from the Cannabis Compliance Board on the call if there are questions regarding that report. What I would like to say is that I believe AB 322 will provide greater opportunity for diversity within the cannabis industry, further marking Nevada as the gold standard in how to do cannabis right. As we prepare to go over this bill and the amendments, I just want to mention a couple of things. In the email I sent to you all, the introduced version of AB 322 was largely based on schemes from other states that have similar businesses in their existing law. And there was a significant level of detail imported from those states. In conversations with stakeholders, we realized it would be more appropriate at this time not to go into that level of detail in statute, but rather to pare the statutory scheme back to a more bare bones authorization for these kinds of businesses to be licensed in Nevada, granting authority to the Cannabis Compliance Board to vet best practices and carefully establish what these businesses can and cannot do through regulation. This will allow the process of developing this new business structure to be reactive and flexible, with a goal of bringing the best working structure into statute in a future session. Nevada stands out as the gold standard in several other industries. I've already mentioned gaming. There's also tourism and mining, energy, And now it's time to add cannabis to that list. Chair, with your permission, I would like to turn the remainder of the presentation over to Ms. Goins and our guests. Thank you.
Thank you. Please go ahead, Ms. Goins.
Chair, with your permission, I'd like for Mr. Andrew Muro do his presentation.
Please go ahead, Mr. Muir.
All right. Hello, guys. My name is Andrew Muir, owner and CEO of Top Shelf Bud Tending. I have an extensive track record in the responsible and lawful handling, managing, and serving of cannabis and cannabis products within the cannabis hospitality venues, private event, and wedding spaces, including assisting large-scale vertically integrated cannabis companies and small boutique brands. I've established responsible consumption standards, effective service solutions, and conceptual development for on-site consumption facilities, as well as consumption-friendly venues and events. I've assisted in drafting numerous consumption-friendly bills, including Initiative 300 in Denver, as well as House Bill 1230, which established a first-of-its-kind state-level hospitality licensing system for all sizes of cannabis businesses. Over the past 6 years, my company, Top Shelf Bud Tending, has successfully served over 80,000 guests in event settings, spanning 6 adult-use legal cannabis markets. So I've quite literally seen the cannabis hospitality industry in its infancy and grow up from that. I've seen what works and what doesn't work, which brings me to Nevada and AB 322. I moved to Las Vegas in 2017 with the hope of ushering a new era of cannabis hospitality, because that's what the state is known for, hospitality. Now, nearly 4 years later, I believe it is our time to allow cannabis hospitality to be included in the unique ecosystem that Nevada has currently. From my experience living in Las Vegas, cannabis consumption is happening on the streets, in casinos, whether we like it or not, at events, and it hasn't stopped, and it's most likely going to continue as long as product is available. So currently, with my knowledge, before the pandemic happened, the only place to purchase and consume cannabis was at the Paiute tribe-owned Nuwu Dispensary, which it's a fantastic place all on its own. While on-site cannabis hospitality venues that are attached to dispensaries are essential to a thriving cannabis hospitality ecosystem, I believe that we need more license types and models to allow small businesses to thrive. Assembly Bill 322 helps us achieve this in a way never seen before in our industry. AB 322 allows small business owners and operators like myself and other event coordinators and hospitality professionals to properly monetize cannabis. That's really never been done before in the industry on the scale that we're looking at here. Currently, we have no way of monetizing cannabis at events, and it makes it very difficult for small businesses to remain afloat. This will allow more tax dollars from overall sales due to consumers choosing convenience of purchasing cannabis at a reputable vendor at an event. So it's better than going against an untaxed legacy dealer, in that case, at the event. So more tax dollars all around. This will allow the bring your own cannabis hospitality establishments to monetize their businesses properly, whereas this was not possible before. The BYO lounge models are failing in states that have implemented them. We've seen this in Denver when we brought up I-300 in Denver. We basically just started the way that the BYO lounges worked, and currently there is only one left in the city remaining. The bring your own cannabis lounge model is currently failing from my perspective. AB 322 will also provide a pathway for legacy operators to become licensed, which they were talking about as well. It provides a social equity applicant with a license type that's not been touched by big business or out-of-state license holders. This bill provides a pathway to true social equity, which is also very rare to find in the industry right now with the structure that they have going on with this license type. It allows underprivileged operators the opportunity to participate in an industry that has largely cut them out by offering an affordable and manageable pathway to licensing. These licenses have the ability to restore impacted communities and build a generational wealth within those communities, which we don't have a lot of in the cannabis space. Purchased cannabis for resale will be coming directly from already established license holders who have tested and safe cannabis. So for the consumers at these events, having tested and safe cannabis available for them to consume makes it easier not only for us to control those products given to the consumers, but also makes it easier for law enforcement to know where those products are coming from. Dispensary license holders will also be able to monetize the events, products, and cannabis hospitality spaces because we'll be working directly with them. Licenses will require safe cannabis hospitality experience including the controlled consumption areas, tested product, and educated workers on site. So we'll have control of the product in those tested area or in those controlled consumption areas. So it makes it a lot easier for us to keep our guests safe. It's always a big thing to keep the guests safe. And I think with this being such a brand new solution, never seen before, I think safety is going to be our number one concern. And I think this tackles it very well. So as it stands, I am for the bill, but I do have 2 reservations as it stands. I would like to see a 2-year residency clause built in to allow Nevadans to have a first shot at the licenses without interference from outside entities. And I would also like to see some type of education benchmark, cleanliness benchmark, if we could add those into the bill. Other than that, I like what we have going on here. And I think it's a fantastic way forward in the realm of not only social consumption, but social equity and allowing a fair place for everyone to get their businesses started. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Ms. Goins, are we going back to you, or is there someone else who's going to be speaking?
No, Chair, it would be me.
Okay, please go ahead. And I failed to say this earlier, so I should remind people, when you speak, please make sure and state your name each time.
This is Aisha Goins for the record. And Chair, with your permission, I'd like to continue.
Oh, please go ahead.
What was sort of striking was the lack of diversity in some of the leadership levels. Lake Martin, executive director of the Nevada Dispensary Association, was quoted February 2021 in an interview with the Nevada Independent magazine. In that same article, Tyler Clements, executive director of the Cannabis Compliance Board, said one reason for the lack of diversity is the high bar to enter the industry, including the capital needed to start a cannabis establishment. An application fee for a license is $5,000, while the actual licensing fee can be as high as $30,000, depending on the facility type. Those fees have resulted in fewer cannabis licenses for the communities of color who were disproportionately targeted or affected by the decades of drug policy like the war on drugs. In the 32nd Nevada special session, the Assembly and the Senate unanimously adopted SCR 1, a resolution declaring systematic racism as a public health crisis. A few paragraphs from that resolution read as follows. Whereas systematic racism and structure of racial discrimination create generational poverty and perpetuate debilitating economic, educational, and health hardships, and disproportionately affect people of color, causing the single most profound economic and social challenge facing Nevada. Whereas Nevada is a growing and diverse state with continually shifting demographics, and whereas racism has deep, harmful impacts and unfairly disadvantaged Black, Indigenous, and other persons of color, and has impeded solutions necessary to achieve racial parity. According to the CCB 2021 demographic study, there were 612 licensed cannabis adult use owners. 71 of those are Hispanic or Latin descent. 28 are Black or African descent, and 14 are Indigenous or Alaskan Native. 74% of cannabis executives identify as white. My org, CEIC, Cannabis Equity and Inclusion Community, has dedicated our time and energy and passion to ensure the freedom of our community, equity in the Nevada cannabis marketplace, and opportunities for those disenfranchised by the war on drugs. It is because of my team's dedication to their community, I present to you today Assembly Bill 322. The existing law provides for the licensure and regulations of persons and establishments involved in the cannabis industry in the state. I want to call your attention to Section 25.5 of this bill. It requires the board to give priority to a social equity applicant in processing applications for a cannabis event organizing license. And Section 14.5 defines social equity applicant to generally mean an applicant that has been adversely affected by previous laws that criminalize activity relating to cannabis. Section 25.5 further requires the board to adopt regulations establishing criteria to determine whether an applicant qualifies as a social equity applicant. And I want to make sure, I want to just introduce the two licenses, if I may. Section 2 is a cannabis event organizer. It means a business that is licensed by the board pursuant to Section 15 of this act, and 2, permits, maintains, promotes, conducts, advertises, operates, undertakes, organizes, manages, sells, or gives away tickets to temporary cannabis events. Section 4 is the portable cannabis vendor. It means a business that is licensed by the board pursuant to Section 21 of this act and purchases cannabis or cannabis products from an adult use cannabis retail store and sells such cannabis or cannabis product at a temporary cannabis event. Section 8 defines the temporary cannabis event. It means an event held by a cannabis event organizer for which a temporary cannabis event area permit has been issued by the board pursuant to Section 16 of this act, and at which participants of adult use cannabis retail sales or portable cannabis vendor sales, cannabis or cannabis products to persons 21 years of age or older. The consumption of cannabis or cannabis products by persons 21 years of age is allowed. The intent of this bill is to provide new licensing for those that were disenfranchised, but also a viable business model. One of the concerns in the marketplace isn't just the licensing itself. It's if we provide these licenses to these persons, can they maintain them? Can they be profitable? I believe that these micro business models will provide that opportunity for not just for new licensing, but also a pathway into our Nevada cannabis marketplace.
Ms. Quins, are you, do you have more for us, or is there someone else who's going next?
No, it is just me. My apologies, Chair.
Okay.
It is just me. And I would be open for questions if that's okay.
Yes, but can we go through the bill some more, or at least through the mock-up? I just want to make sure we get the whole picture of the changes, but also how this would actually proceed if the bill were passed.
Absolutely. It would be my pleasure to do that. So I want I was looking at the bill.
I'm sorry, could you just state your name again?
Yes, my apologies. Aisha Goins, for the record. And Chair, I would like to start at Section 8 because I've gone through sections 8 and 9, so I'll start at Section 10. Section 10 will be amended, which specifies that the words and terms inclusive have the meanings ascribed to them in those sections for those purposes of the regulations of cannabis, unless the context otherwise requires, include the definitions. So I'm going to go to Section 10 so I can read it. I'm going to read. I'm pulling the bill out. Is used in this title unless the context otherwise requires, inclusive of this act, have the meanings ascribed to them in those sections. What cannabis establishment means. And a medical cannabis establishment is a cannabis event organizer or a portable cannabis vendor. Along the lines of a cannabis event organizer license, a cannabis event permit, a portable cannabis vendor license. What's been stricken out is a portable cannabis vendor event license. There were licenses that were unnecessary. And so we're striking those out and just going to have the 2 licenses and the permit to have the event. Section 14 and 5, it goes over the social equity applicant, and it means an applicant for the issuance of renewal of a cannabis event organizer license or portable cannabis vendor license who has been adversely affected by provisions of previous laws which decriminalize activity relating to cannabis, including without limitations adverse effects on an owner, officer, or board member of the applicant or on the geographic location in which the applicant will operate. Section 15 goes over what the the organizer can and can't do. And what an organizer is they would act like a host. So for example, their job would be to curate and manage events, and they could bring in licensees, no more than 3 licensees into an organized event. This also goes over the requirements that will be for the licensee to apply for an application. And section 16 is a person shall not hold a temporary cannabis event unless the person is a cannabis event organizer, has been issued a temporary cannabis event permit for the temporary cannabis event by the board. The intent of this is to ensure that the organizer is the person who is in control of what's happening in that consumption space, along with the, if she has curated vendors, that person's job would be to make sure that those vendors are operating according to the logistics of what she said. And this includes the consumption area, security, and whatever the board puts in place as regulations go. Section 17, a person shall not sell cannabis or cannabis products at a temporary cannabis event unless the person is an adult use cannabis retail store or a portable cannabis vendor. This ensures that we have safe sales and safe consumption. One of the things that has been going on with the events is we've had a lot of legacy marketplaces. Legacy market is what the community calls for illicit market. And so this is to ensure that that person who is organizing that event is maintaining that space is being considered regulated, is being considered in conjunction with regulations of the state of Nevada. That includes sales. Section 18, a cannabis event organizer that holds a temporary cannabis event shall ensure that only persons who are 21 years of age or older are allowed to access areas within the temporary cannabis event designated for the sale or consumption of cannabis or cannabis products. So I want to make sure that the committee understands that these events are specifically for those who are 21 years or older. It is the intent of this bill and these licenses to maintain safe consumption for 21 and older. So a lot of times when I'm pitching this, when I've been talking about this bill, one of the events that people have been using is Life is Beautiful. And according to this bill, the language, that event would not qualify necessarily for the those 2 licensees to operate, because that is an all-age event. So unless the board regulates that that event can have safe consumption, then it wouldn't qualify, because it's supposed to be over 21 only. Section 19, a cannabis event organizer shall not sell cannabis or cannabis products at a temporary cannabis event unless the cannabis event organizer is an adult use cannabis retail store or a portable cannabis vendor. So the cannabis event organizers, that license is only a curator or a promoter. Their task is to ensure that an event has safe consumption place, and then also have vendors or establishments there. They are not a portable cannabis vendor, which I'll be going over. So where you see the language is struck out, these are the regulations where we wanted to give back to the board, to the Cannabis Compliance Board, because they are the standard of what's happening. They are the regulators of what's going on in our industry. And in order to maintain that this business, the cannabis industry, is integral, we wanted to make sure that the Cannabis Compliance Board had that opportunity to put those regulations together. Section 21, a person shall not engage in the business of a portable cannabis vendor unless the person holds a portable cannabis vendor's license. No, so there is the establishments that can be in a cannabis space under the organizer, and then there's the portable cannabis vendor, which looks like, if you're familiar with the portable wine and liquor bars, it is the same idea, but with cannabis. That cannabis vendor cannot hold product. So the product is available only for that event. They make the purchase for that event, and then there is requirements that the board will put in place on how that product will be handled after event, but they do not hold product. Section 22 has been struck out because we wanted to give the Cannabis Compliance Board the opportunity to put regulations together. Section 23, a portable cannabis vendor that participates in temporary cannabis events shall purchase all cannabis or cannabis products for resale at the temporary cannabis event from an adult use cannabis retail store. We recognize that there's already a flow of how the cannabis marketplace works. We didn't want to disrupt that. I understand that there's a digital tracking system from seed to sale. This will ensure that that seed to sale program stays in place so that the Cannabis Compliance Board can still track that product. Section 25 is a local government having jurisdiction over the location in which a temporary cannabis event is to be held may charge the cannabis event organizer a fee for holding the event. Such a fee must be based on the number of persons who are expected to attend the temporary cannabis event. In no world would I assume that a bill would take jurisdiction over jurisdictions. And so this is allowing the jurisdictions to continue to do business the way that they do it, but then also understand what is going on. 25.5, in a processing application for a cannabis event, organizer license, or portable cannabis vendor license, and in the issuance of such a license, the board shall give priority to a social equity applicant. The board shall adopt regulations establishing criteria to be used by the board for determining whether an applicant for this issuance or renewal of a cannabis event organizer license or portable cannabis vendor license qualifies as a social equity applicant for the purpose of this section. There hasn't been any rule set in place for how equity should be handled in the cannabis marketplace. This is one of the first times that social equity program has been introduced in the Nevada cannabis marketplace. We wanted to make sure that the Cannabis Compliance Board had the authority to decide what that should look like based on their findings, based on their analysis. And so that's what this does. And I believe the last conversation, my apologies. Last section is going to deal with excise tax. On section 31, 2, the board shall establish regulation fees for the issuance and renewal of cannabis event organized license, the issuance of temporary cannabis event permits, and the issuance of renewal of portable cannabis vendor license. Again, this is just ensuring that the Cannabis Compliance Board has the authority to put regulations in place that they believe are in the best interest of the industry. The board may regulate The board may be regulation establish reduced fees for an applicant for the initial issuance of renewal of a cannabis event organized license or portable cannabis vendor's license that is a social equity applicant, wanting to ensure that those social equity applicants have the opportunity to get into the industry without there being so many barriers to the industry. Section 33, number 9, set forth rules pertaining to the safe and healthful operation of temporary cannabis events, including without limitations requiring for testing, labeling, and sale of cannabis and cannabis products at a temporary cannabis event. This is just reiterating the statutes that already are there as relates to labeling and presentation. The Cannabis Compliance Board has done a great job of ensuring that those products are labeled for safe consumption. And since they will be going from retail to these events, that will stand in place. Section 34.3, for the purpose of paragraph subsection 1, an area within a temporary cannabis event that is designated for the consumption of cannabis or cannabis products is not a public place or a place open to the public or exposed to the public view. Again, it is important that the integrity of our business, the cannabis industry, remains in place. It is never our intent to have youth or underage persons have access to cannabis. So what this will do is ensure that at these events, there's an enclosed area for sales and for consumption. Section 36, subsection 2, for the purpose of this subparagraph, a paragraph of subsection 1, an area within a temporary cannabis event. This is designated for the consumption of cannabis or cannabis products is not a public place or place open to the public or exposed public view, is just reiterating that I just discussed. A person may smoke or otherwise, Section 37, subsection 9, a person may smoke or otherwise consume cannabis or a cannabis product in an area within a temporary cannabis event that is designated for the consumption of cannabis and cannabis products. This is to ensure that when those sales happen, that those persons stay in that area, and that is our intent. It is not intended that there will be sales at an event and there will just be people walking around at the event selling, unless the whole event is enclosed. And again, this is just making sure that we have safe sales and safe consumptions so that we keep the integrity of our tourism and our events in Nevada. Section 42, subsection 8, the excise tax imposed pursuant to subsection 3 does not apply to a sale of cannabis or cannabis product by an adult use cannabis retail store to a portable cannabis vendor for the purpose of resale. This ask is that because the vendor will be purchasing from retail, which would be a retail price, this is the ask that the vendor puts the excise tax on that end. So it acts as a wholesale purchase from the retailer to the vendor.
And so Ms. Goins, I think now is the time when we need to recess. Before we do that, I'd like Madam Secretary, please note that Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod has joined us. She joined us quite a while ago as soon as her other hearing was over, so I appreciate that. For the members of the public who are on hold who want to testify, you're welcome to wait or to call back in later. However, if you don't want to do that, feel free to send us your testimony in written form. We will add that to the exhibits and review that. So with that, we will be in recess and we will be back as soon as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman Chair.
We are muted to the broadcast, and you may begin when ready.
Thank you. Thank you for everyone who returned. We're going to come back from recess and go back to the hearing on the bill. Assemblyman Miller and Ms. Goins, is there more to the presentation, or are you ready for questions?
Chair Cohen, there is just one section left in the bill, and then I would be ready for questions.
Please go ahead. And again, just as a reminder, if you're testifying, please state your name at the beginning of your testimony. Thank you.
Aisha Goins for the record. And Section 4 of Assembly Bill 322 reads, this section becomes effective upon passage and approval. I just wanted to paint a picture of what these two ideal licenses would be like. The first being a cannabis event organizing license. That person would act as like a promoter, an advertiser, and an event curator. The idea is that they could, for example, host an event, bring the event together. Their responsibilities could be that they would ensure that there is safe consumption, there is safe sales by facilitating no more than a few establishments within this space. The space would be enclosed. It could have space for people to consume safely, having security in that space, and they would be responsible to ensure that persons coming in and out of that space are of the appropriate age, which is 21 and over. The portable vendor license in concept would operate only when a temporary event permit has been given. Both of these licenses cannot operate without the approval of the CCB upon each individual event. The portable cannabis vendor would be getting their product from a retailer hours prior to the event. They could only be in a specific area that has been submitted to the Cannabis Compliance Board for approval. That approval would ensure the space area, what's being sold in that space, how much available for seating in that space. And then also they would also be required to ensure that those persons are over the age of 21 and that they had safe consumption in that area. These individual licenses are not to operate alone without ever getting the approval from the Cannabis Compliance Board, and they are not supposed to be operating events that haven't been sanctioned from those jurisdictions. These are not standalone operational loan licenses. These are not brick and mortar licenses. These are just small business, micro business ideal licenses that could only operate in the capacity that the Cannabis Compliance Board gave them. That is the end of my presentation, and I appreciate you, Chair Cohen, for offering me the time. I am available for questions.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Goins. And just to Assemblyman Miller, are we ready for questions, or was there anyone else?
No, I believe we are ready for questions if Ms. Goins is ready. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. With that, we have several people who asked for questions. So let me just tell you who we've got so far, and then if any of the other members have questions, just let me know. I've got Assemblyman Yeager, Assemblywoman Anderson, Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod, and Assemblyman Hafen so far. So please go ahead, Assemblyman Yeager.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I have several questions, but maybe with your indulgence, I'll just ask a few of them and maybe come back. I'm sure other people have the same questions, so I don't want to monopolize the time. And thank you for the presentation. Some of my questions are just kind of clarifications because, the amendment made some pretty substantial changes, and I just want to make sure I understand what the amendment is doing versus the original bill. So the first question probably would be for Ms. Goins. I think the original bill had indicated or specified that there would be a mechanism where, a portable cannabis vendor, and I'm probably getting the name wrong, but that they would have to return the product back to the dispensary where they got it. And I think you said in your presentation that you took that out and you're going to leave that up to the Cannabis Compliance Board to figure out that mechanism. So I just wanted to confirm that that was the intent of the amendment presented.
Chair to Assemblyman Yeager, Aisha Goins for the record. Yes, that is the intent, is to allow the Cannabis Compliance Board to put those regulations in place however they see fit to maintain the integrity of the industry.
Great, thank you. And the next question was, is your vision of how this would operate, if you had an event where cannabis was going to be allowed, would people still be able to bring their own cannabis, or would they would have to exclusively purchase on site from the licensed vendors?
Thank you for the question, Chair Cohen to Assemblyman Yeager. Aisha Goins for the record. The intent is that safe sales and safe consumption. So only products that have been regulated through the Cannabis Compliance Board from already retailed establishments would be available for sale. And those persons coming in and out of those sanctioned spaces would be secured to have that happen.
Thank you. And then my next couple of questions really go to the social equity piece, which, obviously is something I'm very interested in. I think a number of committee members are. And so the first question is, in the section 14.5 in the amendment, it defines what social equity is, and it makes a reference to impacted geographic locations of where the, where the event might take place. And I just wanted to get a little bit of your thought process, because I think it makes a lot of sense when we think about individuals who were impacted being able to obtain these licenses. But give me a little bit of the thought process on looking at geographic locations and how that really fits into the social equity piece.
Chair Cohen to Assemblyman Yeager, Aisha Goins for the record. That specific segment was actually taken out of Assemblyman Yeager's consumption lounge bill, and I wanted to be consistent with that language because I know social equity is the conversation for this session, and so the geographical part wouldn't apply to this, and we had already had the conversation before we were able to amend that. However, that would not apply to this bill. Thank you for the question, Assemblyman Yeager.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, could I ask just a couple more quick ones?
Yes, Ms. Goins, please feel free to go directly to the member.
Thank you. So then this may be a question for Mr. Klimas, who I know is on there, but then on the Zoom, when we talk about social equity, when we look at section 25.5 of the amendment, it really kind of specifies how social equity is going to play out in this process. And just let me look at the page. So this is page 16 of the amendment, section 25.5. It talks about the board shall give priority to a social equity applicant. And I guess, Ms. Goins, I was just curious what your vision, or Assemblyman Miller, what your vision was for priority. Does that mean they're going to sort of jump the line over everyone else and they get the license, or is there going to be some kind of scoring system where they get additional consideration, or are we just going to leave that up to the Cannabis Compliance Board to figure out how to structure it?
If I may answer, Assemblyman Yeager, the intent is to ensure, Aisha Goins for the record, the intent is to ensure that there is an equity into this marketplace. I would absolutely leave that to the Cannabis Compliance Board and the Cannabis Advisory Commission, and how they see fit is the best way to roll that process out.
Thank you. And then the final question I have, this might be one for legal or policy staff who's on the Zoom, but we heard some discussion about the excise tax and how the vision here is that a vendor would essentially purchase the product from a retail establishment, and the excise tax would not be collected then and there, but the excise tax would be collected once the product is actually sold at an event to a consumer. And my question there is, I think we had two different taxes we were talking about. There was the one that was passed by the voters in the initiative petition, and then there was the one, I think it was in the 2019 session, or maybe it was the 17 session, I always forget, where the legislature added on another additional, I think, 10% excise tax. So the question was just, are both of those taxes going to be paid by the end user consumer at the event, or is one of them paid at the time of purchase from the actual retail establishment? So I don't know who's best to answer that. I see Mr. Gimden's unmuting, so maybe that's the way to go.
Madam Chair, if it's okay, I can attempt to.
Go ahead, Mr. Ginden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Russell Ginden, Principal Deputy Fiscal Analyst with the Fiscal Analysis Division. That's a very good question and observation, Solomon Yeager, because I've been thinking about that myself and actually interacting with the Department of Taxation via email. I think that's one of the things your staff would have to look into, but is because for me, is to answer your question that this is tangible personal property, clearly. So the sales tax is attached when the retail sale occurs. What you were referencing is the ballot question had the 15% wholesale excise tax in it. And then the legislature at the end of the 2017 regular session put in place the 10% retail excise tax. So when there's a retail sale of cannabis and cannabis products, the sales tax attaches to that retail sale as well as the 10%. And so that's one of the things as I'm looking at section 23 of the mock-up, which is also in the bill, is introduced, is what will happen here, because on the sales tax side of things, we have what's called a resale certificate. So when you're selling at retail, these people will probably the portable vendors may have to register with the Department of Taxation as a retailer and obtain a seller's permit. And then they can also obtain a resale certificate. So then when they're purchasing this, the portable vendor is purchasing the products from the adult use, they can show that resale certificate, and thus the tax won't be collected by the adult use person on the from the portable vendor. So then that would seem to me that then when the portable vendor is selling it at retail to a person at the event, then the sales tax would due and have to be collected and remitted. So that's my logic thinking through it as someone with regards to sales tax. Thinking through the 10% retail tax, it's less clear to me because under the current regulated controlled environment for marijuana, I don't know that our statutory provisions envisioned this wholesaler resale type interaction where somebody can buy something from a retail adult use establishment to then resell at retail. And so that's one of the things that it's also on my radar, and I'll be interacting with the Department of Taxation to seek additional clarity on that, as well as what I stated, since I don't work for the Department of Taxation. So I gave you my opinion, and once I get the answer from them, then we can provide that. But I just think that it's possibly more clear on the sales tax side because we have well-established provisions to handle somebody buying it and then wanting to sell it against at retail. I just haven't had a chance to go read the provisions for the 10% retail marijuana excise tax to see if we have that, or if taxation feels they would be comfortable administering that without any additional regulatory provisions put in place, or say a statutory change that would be needed to be able to accommodate this new structure. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Ginden. Assemblyman Yeager, do you have any other questions?
I'll defer for the moment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod.
Thank you, Chair. And I did come into the meeting late, so perhaps this was discussed before I joined, but I was just curious about how this lines up with compliance of the Nevada Indoor Air Act, if it does or if that's been considered.
Thank you for your question, Assemblywoman Aisha Goins. For the record, again, I have an expectation that the Cannabis Compliance Board will put in regulations for the Safe Air Act, because I do know that all of our hopes is that the cannabis industry stays integral, but that is something that the CCB would have to put in place.
Do you need a follow-up?
I see that Mr. Klimas is on. I don't know if that's something that he could answer, or I don't know. I'm not sure who was actually here presenting, because like I said, I missed the beginning.
Yeah, Mr. Klimas is here in neutral, but Mr. Klimas, if you're available to answer that question.
Sure. Thank you, Chair. Tyler Klimas for the record, and Assemblywoman, thanks for the question. I mean, obviously, it's something that we would have to look in. This is a very new concept, and so we'd have to draft language or some kind of regulations around the Clean Air Compliance Act. But I wouldn't have any kind of clarity at this point of where we're at on that. But you are right to bring it up. It would be a concern.
Thank you for that. Any other follow-up, Assemblywoman? Thank you. We have a question from Assemblyman Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate it. So I have a couple of questions regarding the event security and stuff like that. I know that regular vendors or regular businesses, they're limited on the amounts that they can transport, and they put in some contingencies for transporting large amounts of marijuana. And then also it's a cash-only business, that as well. Would the same kind of regulations apply? And this is probably something for the Cannabis Board. Would the same regulations apply to vendors for these events?
If that question was directed at me, Assemblyman Roberts, Tyler Klimas, for the record, and thanks for the question. And again, just talking about this concept being very new for the state of Nevada, obviously enforcement and regulation would be the top of mind for us and probably the most critical piece of that. So yes, I mean, all of those regulations, we consider security, one of the most important aspects of compliance, and it has to be ingrained in compliance plans for all of our establishments as we currently sit. And so if these were to be new license types or these events were to be permitted, these security plans would have to be extremely vetted. And then, of course, we would have to have the enforcement resources to go out there and make sure those security concerns were being met in all aspects. I mean, that's cash handling, product distribution, from top to bottom.
And Madam Chair, a follow-up. And so your staff would be doing those follow-up inspections and things like that. And the only reason I ask is, in Las Vegas, I mean, we have thousands and thousands and thousands of special events every year. We got an overview of your staff on some other presentations. And is this something that you could handle, or is this something you would scale up?
Thank you for the question, Assemblyman Tyler Klimas, again for the record. I mean, we would absolutely have to scale up on our resources. We're working on, a fiscal note right now, doing the best to try to anticipate, right? If we're talking about permits for events, this is essentially, there's an unlimited capacity, as you just mentioned, for events. And we're not talking just about Las Vegas. We'd be talking about the state of Nevada, right? And so yes, we anticipate, and we've made it clear, certainly to the bill sponsors, that a fiscal note is coming. It's just that we really we're trying to find metrics that make sense as far as the quantity of events that are possible, event licenses, and certainly we want to put forth, a reasonable, responsible kind of fiscal note on this. But as far as enforcement, I mean, the CCB's charge is to regulate and oversee all aspects of the cannabis industry. So yes, if these were to go on, it would be, I think, imperative that the CCB has enforcement and regulatory control over these.
And one last one, Madam Chair, and it's all on the same line. So would your office be approving site plans? And I can't remember which section that is in here, but it says that approved plans. Now, other special events, when I was at Metro, whatever jurisdiction, whether it was in the county or the city of Las Vegas or whoever approved special event plans, and the local police department was involved in that. Would that be the process for this, or would this all go through the Cannabis Compliance Board?
And Tyler Klimas, again for the record, and Assemblyman, the bill sponsor maybe can clarify, but the way that I understand the bill is that the CCB would oversee the approval process of the plans and the permits. However, a local approval, including whatever fees the locals attach to that, is part of that approval process, similar to how we do approvals for like change of locations and things like that. But you're absolutely right. Enforcement of these will be, a joint operation between the locals and local law enforcement. I mean, it would take that kind of coordination to oversee these kinds of events. Estimating that there's going to be a range from small events to very, very large events.
And thank you very much for the answers, and thank you, Madam Chair, for the questions.
You're welcome. Thank you, Mr. Klimas. Assemblyman Hafen, do you still have a question?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And first, I'd just like to echo Assemblyman Yeager's and Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod's questions. They stole a number of them, but I still do have a couple, so I do appreciate the time this evening. Assemblyman Miller, at the beginning of your testimony, you referenced a report from the Cannabis Compliance Board, and I just want to confirm that the one that I was looking at is the correct one. It's the demographic report of the Nevada's cannabis industry dated January 29th, 2021.
Yes, Assemblyman Hafen. See, Assemblyman Miller for the record. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. And then is that the report then that will be used in reference to section 25.5 to ensure that the board is actually meeting those criteria?
Yes, I believe that would serve as a guideline. However, the criteria and the path to meeting the criteria have not yet been developed.
Thank you for that. And thank you, Madam Chair. Everyone else covered the rest of my questions. I appreciate it.
Assemblyman O'Neill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I apologize. I've been having some IT issues that I actually lost connection. So these questions may have been already asked. If they have, just tell me already asked and answered, and I'll move on. But I have three questions, and hopefully they're short. The first one, will alcohol sales be allowed also at these events? So you'll be mixing alcohol and cannabis usage?
Thank you, Assemblyman O'Neill, for the question. Alcohol may be a part of the larger event, but it would not be a part of the specified cannabis event. So that's if the cannabis event is in the footprint of a larger event, nothing outside of cannabis would be in the cannabis space. But however, it's designed for this event to fit within the scale or the footprint of a larger event that may have alcohol sales outside of the cannabis space.
So there's the possibility of mixing both alcohol and cannabis, then the participants, the visitors, could partake in both, correct?
If someone so choose, Assemblyman Miller for the record, if someone so chose to consume both, they would have that option, just as they likely would do now without the space.
Thank you, Assemblyman Miller. The other question I had is, just before I lost all connection, there was conversation, you will not be allowed to bring in any personal cannabis, was my understanding. The answer to that was correct. So my question is, what would be the plan now when alcohol is not allowed to come into an event? They take quick looks through backpacks, bags, etc. Considering the ease of secreting or hiding cannabis, do you have any idea what the policies could be? Or who would establish those policies to prevent cannabis being brought in?
Assemblyman Miller for the record. Yes, so those policies would be a part of the regulations that CCB would develop. The goal with the bill and the amendment is to is to be able to authorize the licenses and give CCB the opportunity to properly vet best practices and implement those things, through regulation so that we can really figure out the best way to maneuver as we develop the industry. So things like that, anything that kind of comes to regulation of how things will flow, who can go where, who can have what the size of the event, all of those things we look to work with CCB on in the regulatory process to develop them. And I believe that the initial bill can also serve as a framework or a footprint to start to build from as we build out these regulations, because the initial bill is based on other states that already have some similar type of cannabis event organizer or host and things like that.
Thank you. And if I may, Chair, just one last quick question, or I think the answer may be the same, that'll be handled under regulations, if I may.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Assemblyman Miller, just for clarity's sake, you have an event. I heard that you have secluded areas for cannabis usage, and then you may also have the larger where the entire event would be considered cannabis. So my question would be, what would be the protection for your security or law enforcement, that their staff, your medics, if you have any, so they do not consume or involved in secondhand smoking and become under the influence also of, I just hate to see law enforcement, security, et cetera, be suffering with that. Is there any plan or thought to that issue?
Assemblyman Miller, for the record, thank you for the question, Assemblyman O'Neill. I too share your desire to want to protect our law enforcement officers, the security, as well as anyone that may be working or operating at the event. Off of the top of my head, the first thing I would think was that appropriate PPE would be necessary. However, I would again look to work with CCB to discover what is the best way to protect those who are there to work and not actually engage to protect them from, the smoke and the smoke. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman Miller. I appreciate your answers. And thank you, Chair, for allowing me the time.
Certainly. I just want to jump in with a quick follow-up. If Mr. Klimas, can you tell us the CCB's involvement with alcohol as it stands right now? I mean, obviously, I know you don't regulate it, but is there any type of involvement that any of the facilities have, any training that your staff has, that type of thing?
Thank you, Chair. Tyler Klimas for the record. The CCB has no involvement in alcohol. Alcohol is not allowed at any cannabis facilities or to be sold at retail establishments.
Okay, thank you. And then does your agency work with or ever do any work with the agencies that regulate alcohol in the state?
Thank you, Chair. Tyler Klimas again for the record. No, there's not really been a point of intersection at this time, but I think, given this bill and consumption lounge conversations, we'll see where it goes. But at this point, there's never been that intersection from the regulatory side or from the retail side.
Thank you. I have a question from Assemblywoman Kasama.
Thank you, Chair. Assemblywoman Heidi Kasama, District 2, for the record. It sounds like it's it may be complicated to have this indoors. Maybe these have to be adjacent spaces outdoors to the indoor events where they directly go out there. I don't know. It just sounds like it's getting complicated to have it inside with the air quality features. But I have two questions. If you purchase cannabis in the space, I know we said that people couldn't bring it in, but if you purchase it and you don't use it all up in the space, can you take it out of the space and take it with you? You buy too much?
Assemblywoman Kasama, Aisha Goins, for the record, the intent is for that not to happen. The intent is for safe consumption and safe purchase in that space. So it is not in this bill intent is not to have large purchases or those purchases to be consumed later in the same space that if you go to a special event and you purchase alcohol, they don't like you to take the alcohol out of those special events. It would be the same concept.
Right, finish your glass of wine there. Okay, good, got that. And my other question is, and Assemblyman Yeager may have touched on it, the section 14.5, the social equity applicant, I find that confusing. And I think you said the geographic location would be taken out. But there's a section there, adversely affected by provisions of previous laws which criminalized activity related to cannabis. And then if we go to section 15, I'm looking at page 7 of the amendment, the section B, where it says people cannot have been convicted of an excluded felony offense. So perhaps I don't understand it. To me, it almost reads like if you've had crimes for possession, I guess, or something. But then over here, it says to qualify for the license, you can't have had those issues. So they seem in conflict to me. Perhaps I'm not a lawyer, so perhaps I'm not reading that correctly.
Assembly Kasama, that is a great question, and I'm glad that you pointed that out. And I actually had to Google that myself. And so an excluded felon does not qualify for those cannabis-related offenses.
So a person that had a charge or conviction of cannabis could still get the license and operate. Is that correct?
Assembly Kasama, Aisha Goins, for the record, I want to clarify that excluded felonies are specific felonies. And that's what that language is alluding to. And cannabis is not one of those excluded felonies.
Okay, thank you.
Assemblyman Miller, have you communicated with the counties and the municipalities about the roles they would play in this?
Thank you, Chair Cohen. Thank you for the question. Yes, I have had some conversation with representatives from NACO, Clark County, as well as I believe it's the urban, it represents the cities, and I'm sorry if I don't recall the actual association. And what I understand is they are likely to call in today, possibly in opposition, not because they don't like the bill or the concept of it. They just want to also ensure that they have the ability to approve, the events within their local jurisdictions. And so that is something that we are definitely open to. And initially, was the intent to allow the local jurisdictions to have the authority to allow or deny these events in their borders, as well as, like Mr. Klimas said, work with CCB as it relates to enforcement and all of the other necessary components to ensure that the events are safe, secure, regulated, and successful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. And we do have a follow-up question from Assemblyman Yeager.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I promised I'd be back, and here I am. So, Ms. Goins, I just want to go back to this idea of unused product being returned to the vendor, and I was able to find that section. It's section 23 of the amendment. And sort of here's one of my concerns, and I guess I just want you to sort of address it, because the way I read this, what would happen is the portable cannabis vendor is going to buy the product from the retailer, but they're probably going to end up having some kind of certificate from taxation that indicates they don't have to pay the taxes. They're going to take that product out. They're going to take it to the event. If they don't sell it all, the way I read that provision is the cannabis retail store must accept the product back and then refund the money. So my concern is if I'm an owner of a retail store, I may not want to provide that product, because once that product leaves my store, how do I ensure the integrity of the unused product coming back? And I just think about Las Vegas and music festivals in the middle of the summer where you've got product potentially being out there in the heat. So I guess I just wondered, I guess the question really is, have you conferred, or you or Assemblyman Miller conferred with retail stores about whether they would be willing to do that? Because my concern is they just won't sell. If you walk in with a certificate and you're a portable cannabis vendor, they're going to say, we don't want any part of that because we don't want to have to take the product back.
Assemblyman Yeager, Aisha Goins, for the record. Yes, actually, that's a great question. I appreciate that question. And I hate to keep reverting back to the Cannabis Compliance Board, but those were ideas that we had gotten from other regulatory and statutory conversations from other states. And that doesn't necessarily have to be, I definitely want to defer all regulations back to the Cannabis Compliance Board, because I really believe that they are the professionals in this marketplace and they will act on behalf of the integrity of the industry moving forward. So I agree with you, that may not be the case. And I am willing to look forward to a better solution if that is the case.
Thank you, Ms. Goins. Assemblywoman or Chair Cohen, could I ask Mr. Klimetz just one question on this topic while we're on it?
Go ahead.
Sorry to call on you again, Mr. Klimetz. I know it's late. So my question was just, under the metric tracking system that we have for product, I just wondered, I'm going to try to ask this question as good of a way as possible. So I guess in theory, if we were to implement this procedure, the retail shop is going to show a sale of the product to the portable cannabis vendor. And then I guess the portable cannabis vendor would have their scan system where you would know that product was being sold. But what would happen with the unused product if it has to be, and I guess here's my question, if ultimately the decision was, look, you can't force the retail shop to take the product back, maybe it needs to be destroyed in some way. I think about, restaurants, they have to try to inventory and buy product, and sometimes they buy too much and it goes to waste. But is there a way the metric system can sort of account for that, the way that the metric system is set up now? If you could maybe just talk about that. And I'm sorry I didn't ask the question in a really great way, but I just want to see how these things sort of fit together.
No, thank you, Assemblyman, for the question. This is Tyler Klimetz for the record. And yeah, I mean, and that would be a concern of ours as we work through this process. I mean, metric is seed to sale. Remains to be seen if it can be seed to sale and then returned back into a retail store. So something we would have to look at, obviously consult with metric on the mechanisms for something like that. And you brought up destruction, and we utilize destruction, for untagged product and other instances where, it can't be tracked. And so maybe that is a way to move or a way to work with product that is left unused. But those are big points that would have to be certainly worked through.
Thank you, Mr. Klimetz, and thank you, Madam Chair, for the additional ability to ask some questions.
Thank you for that. Okay, I don't think we have any other questions, but this is your last chance. Okay, seeing none.
Madam Chair,
sorry, Assemblyman Roberts, go ahead.
I apologize for not doing it on chat. I just had a question about, there is a section with submitting fingerprints and backgrounds and things like that. And I was curious, are the standards, it says, it highlights the standards that an applicant would be either rejected or accepted. Are those going to be the same as other licensees for marijuana or cannabis? Or is it going to be different for vendors and just whatever the promoters. Sorry.
Aisha Goins, for the record, Assemblyman Roberts, that's a great question. The intent is to be consistent. However, there also is a space where it says the Cannabis Compliance Board has the authority to make exceptions if necessary. So the answer is that is the intent. The intent is to, again, maintain the integrity of the industry. That has been consistent with other licensing. And although I understand that this is a small business license or what we would call a micro business license, we still want to make sure that that process is followed through. So that component of the process, again, it is still left up to the Cannabis Compliance Board. However, yes, the intent is to maintain that process.
Thank you very much for the answer, and thank you, Madam Chair, for the question.
With that, we are going to go to testimony in support, and we are going to limit testimony to 2 minutes. Please note if there's more information you'd like us to have, please feel free to submit your testimony as well. With that, BPS, can you please go to the phones in support?
To testify in support of Assembly Bill 322, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 668, please press star 6 to unmute. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hi, good evening. Blake Martin, LAYKEMARTIN. Good evening, Chair Cohen and members of the committee. My name is Blake Martin, and I'm the Executive Director of the Nevada Dispensary Association. The NDA Board is still reviewing the amendment in detail, but we're familiar with the concept, and we support the bill's aim to create new opportunities and greater inclusion in the cannabis industry. With respect to Section 23, which has come up a couple of times during the bill presentation, we look forward to continuing to work with the bill sponsor and the CCB to clarify the procedure and timing for returning product to retailers. Again, and we applaud Assemblyman C.H. Miller and Aisha Goins for their work on developing this new license type, which will create opportunity and increase diversity in the cannabis industry. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person in support, please.
Caller with the last 3 digits of 520, please press star 6 to unmute. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hello, my name is Bree Padilla, for the record, BRIPADILLA, and I'm commenting my support for AB 322, not only as a member of CEIC, but also a member of the Latino community, a professional in the industry, and a citizen whose life has been negatively impacted by the war on drugs. With the legalization of cannabis in Nevada, there was a robust and highly regulated multi-billion-dollar industry that has been spawned. However, there are deep and disturbing disparities and inequities that have become increasingly apparent as our industry matures. Through the growing number of vertically integrated cannabis operators and the consolidation of licensees in our states and others, we have seen the interests of local and small business owners fall to the wayside. From steep barriers to entry that prevent the participation of any applicant who does not have access to tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in funding, to the lack of representation of women, Latinos, Black, and Indigenous community members in our industry, there is a need for the legislature to act now. In support of this assertion, I point to the CCB's recent demographic report findings, which highlighted the need for viable business options and opportunities for communities impacted by the war on drugs. Due to a plethora of reasons, including the negative impacts of systemic racism and discrimination against women. Remember, for much of our history, women were excluded from the business and banking opportunities, and it has only been in the last few decades that the participation of women in industry and entrepreneurship has become established. This historical context is crucial because the state of affairs underscores the need for targeted and specific opportunities that protect and preserve the interests of small business owners, many of whom are women, people of color, and other minority groups. As an entrepreneur, cannabis advocate, and event planner who directly services the cannabis community, I've seen firsthand the deleterious impact of the current set of restrictions on cannabis businesses and ancillary companies seeking to serve their communities and the industry. Not only does the current set of laws encourage illegal and unsafe behavior by not providing legal options for consumption, it also robs conscientious cannabis entrepreneurs with smaller business models of the opportunity to work in the same realm as their peers. By considering legislation like AB 322, the legislator will be giving our industry a dynamic and robust set of tools that allows for diversity and equity when it comes to the kinds of businesses and opportunities our community is able to participate in. Well, if that's I submitted the rest of my comment as well. If I'm out of time, totally fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person in support, please.
Caller with the last three digits of 460. Please press *6 to unmute. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin. Caller with the last three digits of 460. I see you are unmuted. You may begin your testimony.
BPS, can we move on to the next person, and then this person can call back in if if their connection isn't working.
Chair. Caller with the last three digits of 917. Please press *6 to unmute. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hello and good evening, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Ashley Dodson, spelled ASHLEYDODSON. I am a licensed social worker and co-founder of CEIC in support of AB 322. As an advocate and patient user of cannabis, I believe that this bill will be a positive step towards social equity and social justice for those who have been adversely affected by the failed war on drugs. This will open up more opportunities for those in the Black and Brown communities and from the legacy market, creating jobs and addressing the barriers to keep those who identify as such out of the marketplace. AB 322 will also help increase public safety as it will regulate a small business model as an industry should always have. Those who have been previously concerned with how those who will consume and purchase, this bill will provide safe environments for those over the age of 21, like alcohol. According to recent data, in 2020, there were $530 million in legal sales of cannabis. However, with nearly half of the Nevada marijuana industry workforce being people of color, those who hold the executive level positions for cannabis are significantly more white and male. As you can see and imagine, these numbers are staggering. And in terms of distribution and wealth and equity, people of color are disproportionately represented and still in impoverished circumstances in a near billion-dollar industry. This is a perfect representation of systemic racism and the continued social injustices faced by people of color and those disenfranchised by the failed war on drugs. AB 322 will help diminish these wealth gaps, which will lead to more freedom, equity, and opportunities. Small business models are necessary and representation matters. It is my hope that Nevada will join in becoming a leader and being an example in the cannabis industry by cultivating more diversity and inclusion and making those who, again, are disenfranchised by the failed war on drugs with a fair, affordable, and just opportunities. Thank you to CEIC founder Aisha Goings and Assemblyman Miller for their efforts and continuous work. Again, I would urge you to support AB 322 and create change in the growing cannabis industry. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next person in support.
If you are just joining us, we are currently taking testimony in support of Assembly Bill 322. If you wish to testify in support, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits of 742. Please press star 6 to unmute. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin your testimony.
Hello, my name is Christina Thomas, spelled Christina, Thomas, Thomas. Greetings to Chair, Lady, and Committee. I'd like to introduce myself. I am the Chair for Southern Nevada Veterans Mental Health Advocacy Council, as well as a cannabis entrepreneur and small business owner. I am also a part of the core team of CEIC. I'd like to state that I am in favor of this bill because of personal, the medical patient. I also represent several other veterans that are not able to attend certain events as well as these because they are not able to consume cannabis in a safe way while at events. While at events, it is also imperative that we offer those types of licensees to others that have been disenfranchised, as well as other minorities and people of color. If we're able to do that, then we're also able to include social equity, the inclusion of everyone, also creating a more socioeconomic standard as we have been given the gold standard for cannabis throughout the world. It's imperative that we take the stance now to be able to say that we are participating and making sure that we not continue the failed war on drugs and we set the example that is necessary. I urge all of you to support AB 322 in reference to those that are trying to get safe access while at events and also to allow other small businesses to allow across the board social and inclusion for those that are looking to go out and support AB 322. Thank you so much for your time. That is in conclusion to my support.
Thank you, ma'am. Person in support, please.
If you are just joining us, we are still taking testimony in support of Assembly Bill 322. If you wish to testify in support, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits of 601. Please press star 6 to unmute. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin your testimony.
Greetings, Chair and Committee. My name is Asia Duncan, for the record. I'm in support of AB 322 because I'm a representative of the communities disenfranchised by the war on drugs. I'm also a co-founder of CEIC. I'm a Black woman. I'm a mother, an aunt, a sister, a neighbor of Black and Brown communities disproportionately affected by failed war on drug policies, directly and systematically, in terms of wealth, business, growth, resources, and health for generations. Now we've created an entire industry around cannabis sales, cultivation, and production without including social equity, micro small business models, or reinvestment. I believe we can do better. I'm currently an active agent card holder, and I work in the compliance for a licensed cultivation facility here in Nevada. As director of a cultivation facility, we have 2 licenses, medical and recreation, and we're cultivation only. On an executive employee level, I see firsthand the lack of diversity and inclusion, and I also feel the struggle and see the struggle of a small cultivation cannabis license compared to trying to gain market share and brand without enough sales outlet, because a good majority of these dispensaries also are vertically integrated, either not taking on outside brands or cultivations, or just have limited shelf space, period. I feel AB 322 introduces 2 new micro business model concepts that will secure products from dispensaries legally and allow just more growth and production overall. I think it'll contribute to the overall revenue and growth. I support AB 322, and I believe the bill will be a true, tangible way to address social equity, because disenfranchised communities is where small business and micro business thrive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next person in support, please.
Caller with the last three digits of 740. Please press *6 to unmute. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hi, thank you, Chairman. This is Katree Dario Saunders, Katree, last name Saunders. I am in favor of the bill, although I would like for it to be amended on some things. I have been disenfranchised by the war on drugs, not only at a state level, but also at a federal level. I got set up by the DEA under Operation Chronic Problem. I helped protect over 800 patients when I caught my federal case. When I got out of prison, I helped with medical to retail cannabis. I helped make over $100 million for local business owners and the state of Nevada, where they then changed the law to exclude felons from working in the industry. My wrist popped out of place. I was lied to about stock options, insurance, raises. Being disenfranchised not only by the war on drugs, but also by the state of Nevada has left me homeless, left me not unable to get a job, not only in the cannabis industry, but also as even a Lyft driver. My family deserves to build generational wealth within the cannabis industry. I have a son that fights for the United States Air Force. I have 3 other children that deserve for me to be able to build generational wealth, not only limited to portable use vendor licenses, but also inclusion and real ownership that includes cannabis cultivations, dispensaries, labs, tissue culture companies. All those things should be included in real equity when we're speaking in regards to cannabis and those most disenfranchised by the war on drugs. And I thank you for my time. I will yield the floor. That is all I have to say. But I am demanding social justice on an economic level, not only inclusive to these licenses, but also additional licenses need to be distributed to build sustainable generational wealth. Thank you for your time today, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, ma'am. Because you do request changes to the way the amendment is drafted at this point, we are going to list you as opposition, but please feel free to contact the sponsor and continue to work on it with him to see if he's willing to accept your requested changes. With that, we will move on to the next person, please.
Chair, we have no more callers in support at this time.
Thank you. Can we please have the callers in opposition?
To testify in opposition of Assembly Bill 322, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, we have no callers in opposition of Assembly Bill 322.
Thank you. With that, sorry.
I believe we had 2 late hand raises. There are my apologies, Chair.
No problem. Thank you.
Caller with the last 3 digits of 666. Please press *6 to unmute. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Warren Hardy, Warren, Hardy, Hardy. Apologize to broadcast. That was my fault. I unmuted myself instead of got in the queue. I'm, Madam Chair, today representing the Urban Consortium, which is made up of the cities of Las Vegas, Henderson, Reno, and Sparks. Under the rules of committee, we're here in opposition, but I had a good exchange with Assemblyman Miller this afternoon. I think the concerns we have, he articulated in his comments to your question, Madam Chair. So we look forward to continuing to work with him to provide the amendment to clarify the local government's responsibility and ability to approve these events. And also thank Ms. Goins for her willingness to work with us on this as well. She's indicated us, and that's throughout some of my colleagues, that that's her intention as well. So we look forward to continuing to work with the sponsor and want to thank Mr. Miller and Ms. Goins for their consideration of our concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person in opposition, please.
Caller with the last 3 digits of 119. please press *6 to unmute. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Greetings, Chair. My name is Timothy Eliaddo. It's spelled TIMOTHYELIADDO, and I am speaking in opposition of AB 322, and for the reasons that I would like to hopefully include or amend languages that will support the equity aspects for social equity for peoples of color that has been disproportionately marginalized from this industry. Speaking from experience, one of the biggest problems that we have, I had a local nonprofit in the year back in 2013 and 12. And the biggest obstacles that we faced back then is still some of the biggest obstacles we face today, and that is banking and also real estate. So we'll like to, speaking in opposition, in terms that we would like to be able to provide for pathway to ownership like they do in other states, which include so many different resources that could also be diverted back to the communities to also help people of color basically improve our community and also improve the lives of our teenagers as well. And the main reason for also opposition is this, that we as SB 374 and other bills were written in the past, we understand that it went through a lot of changes that basically increased the fees that basically kept a few of us out of the industry. And in respect to Senator Tick's work, we understand that a few of these amendments could be rewritten to favor people that have the experience, the knowledge to also be able to basically work in the supply chain.
2 minutes.
And we.
So if you could wrap it up, and I invite you to continue to communicate with the bill sponsor to see if you can come to some consensus with him.
Thank you.
Sorry, my timer went off. I couldn't get it off. Okay. Is there anyone else in opposition?
Chair, I do believe we have one more in opposition.
Okay, thank you. Please go.
Caller with the last 3 digits of 618. Please press *6 to unmute. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hello, my name is Courtney Lopez, Courtney Lopez. While I support most of the bill, I'm speaking in opposition in the part that prohibits consumers from entering the venues with their own products. I just feel that it presents more of a financial constraint on people. Events in Las Vegas are notoriously expensive. To have people come into these events after paying a high price ticket and be forced to pay an expensive ticket, what is undoubtedly going to be expensive for buying cannabis at an event if they have to mark up for from an already expensive dispensary from which they're buying. It just seems too much of an economic burden on somebody who's trying to enjoy one of these events. I think that allowing consumers to come in with products that have been purchased at a dispensary on their own, they can, somehow come up with a way to show proof of purchase. I think that would be a little bit easier. But the markups are just going to be astronomical, as all markups are in Las Vegas. Go to any event, buy a drink. You'll see what I'm talking about. I just don't think if we're trying to take into consideration for people of color who have been disenfranchised and, let's be honest, have a lower socioeconomic standing, which they have less money to work with, this is not going to really be beneficial to them.
Okay, thank you, sir. And BPS, I believe that was the last person in opposition. So with that, we will move on to neutral. Mr. Clemens, would you like to say anything?
Sorry, Chair, was that directed at me?
Yes, if you'd like to make a statement in neutral.
My apologies, I don't. And my apologies, I took the tie off preemptively, but Tyler Climate for the record, I'm good. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Clemens, and we certainly appreciate you being here. With no one else in neutral on the Zoom, let's go to the phones and see if we've got anyone on neutral.
To testify in neutral on Assembly Bill 322, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, we do not have any callers wishing to testify in neutral.
Okay, thank you, BPS. With that, I will invite the sponsor back up to do a closing statement. And Ms. Goins, also, if you'd like to do a brief closing statement, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Assemblyman Miller, for the record, I will allow Ms. Goins to give her, if she has closing remarks, and then I will do a short, sweet, and tight final statement. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. I just appreciate the committee for allowing this time to present this bill. And I just want to make sure that everyone knows the intent is to, and I know I've said this continuously, but it is my heart to always remain to keep the integrity of the cannabis marketplace in place. You know, I was a pioneer in this industry. It has become a part of me. It is my life's work to ensure that there is a safe pathway and an equitable pathway for those disenfranchised by the war on drugs. I appreciated every single question, and I look forward to working with those who are interested in this bill and coming to an agreement with all so that we can move forward and offer new licensures in our cannabis marketplace. Thank you again for your time, and everyone. I just hope that everyone has a good night because this was great for me.
Thank you, Ms. Goins. We appreciate all your work on this. And with that, Assemblyman Miller, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Assemblyman Miller, for the record, I just want to echo Ms. Goins and thank her for bringing the bill to my attention, as well as joining us today, and all the work of herself and all of the stakeholders that we've had conversations with, and beginning to work on getting to a place that we can all agree. And that is something that I am committed to, is connecting with all interested parties, all stakeholders, to find that solution that will allow this bill to move forward. So with that, we are done. Thank you, Chair and Committee, for your time today. And I urge you to reach out with more questions so that we can gain your support on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman. With that, I will close the hearing on Assembly Bill 322. With that, we will move on to our brief overview of marijuana tax with Mr. Nakamoto. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Michael Nakamoto, Deputy Fiscal Analyst with the Fiscal Analysis Division. Mr. Ginden and Assemblyman Yeager had a little bit of back and forth about the taxes, so my high level might become a little higher level as a result. But basically, since the bill that was under discussion today, AB 322, is more on the regulatory side, I was asked by the chair to go through a little bit of taxation. And as those of you on the committee and most of you remember, question 2 on the November 2016 ballot sought voter approval for decriminalization and then the regulation and taxation of marijuana. And that having passed, imposed a 15% tax on at wholesale for marijuana that is produced in Nevada, and it's taxable at the transfer from the wholesale to the next stage of production. So that was the law specifically for recreational marijuana. The legislature in Senate Bill 487 of the 2017 session, in an effort to streamline the medical and the recreational marijuana, removed the excise taxes of 2% that were on the sale of medical marijuana, edible marijuana products, and marijuana-infused products by cultivators, producers, and dispensaries, and that's medical only. It removed that and it imposed that same 15% wholesale tax on medical marijuana as well. So all marijuana, be it adult use, that is recreational or medical, is subject to this 15% wholesale tax. SB 480, let me back up real quick. The proceeds from those, that 15% excise tax, less administrative costs to the Department of Taxation, as well as costs for administration that are paid to local governments, are currently deposited in the state distributive school account for the benefit of K-12 education, and that is as was required by the ballot question back in 2016. SB 487 of the 2017 session, in addition to streamlining the medical and recreational wholesale taxes, additionally imposed a 10% tax on recreational marijuana only at the retail level. So that tax does not apply to the sales price of medical marijuana, but the 10% tax does apply to the recreational marijuana, as well as the sales tax that would apply as well. The proceeds for that 10% or the retail tax are also deposited in the state distributive school account. And then I would finally note that those proceeds, effective July 1st, 2021, would be deposited in the state education fund, with the transition from the DSA to the state education fund that was approved pursuant to Senate Bill 543 of the 2019 session. With that, Madam Chair, I would be glad to answer any questions that any of the members may have.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions, members?
Yes, I do. Assemblymember Anderson, I may.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. So thank you very much for the information. So I'm more than happy to also have this conversation offline because I think that there's a large amount of rumors, there's a large amount of other things that people have stated. But now with many of the other states legalizing marijuana sales in other ways, has there been a downward trend of this tax, or does it continue to be standard since it was enacted in 2017, or is it even on the rise? I guess what I'm asking for is a little bit more of just how much the utilization has been impacted since other states have started to also legalize marijuana sales.
For the record, Madam Chair and Assemblywoman Anderson, Michael Nakamoto with the Fiscal Analysis Division, I would have to go back and look at the collections, particularly in this fiscal year, and those might actually be a little distorted because of the pandemic. But the last information that I have sitting right in front of me with respect to the retail tax, the 10% tax, is that the collections actually increased in FY 2020 compared to FY 2019. And it was by about $5 million. The wholesale tax had an increase of approximately 2% during that same period from by about from $44 million to about $44.7 million, all told, between the local government portion and then the portion that went to the Department of Taxation and the state distributive school account. We can have the conversation, I suppose, offline with respect to various trends, because I would have to look a little more into that. But my speculation would be that this is a market that is continuing to grow in spite of having surrounding states, namely California, legalize marijuana at the same time.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Chair Cohen.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much, Mr. Nakamoto. And I'll just remind the committee that the staff is always available if you do have any other questions on this issue or anything else related to revenue. With that, we will move on to public comment. BPS, do we have anyone on the line for public comment?
To offer testimony and public comment, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, the public comment line is open and working. However, we have no callers wishing to offer public comment at this time.
Thank you, BPS. All right, before we close out, any comments from committee members? Okay, seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.